I was a younger man, barely out of my 20s, I worked as a security guard at a chemical plant back in my home country of Mexico. It wasn't the kind of job people dreamed of, but it paid steady, and for someone like me, that was enough. Because I never flattered my boss like some of the other guards did, I always ended up with the night shifts. At first, I thought I would hate it. The idea of walking through a shuttered factory, lights dimmed and machinery silent, seemed unbearable. But after a few weeks, something about the stillness grew on me. The nights became predictable, the shadows familiar, and the silence almost comforting. While others whispered that the empty plant gave them the creeps, I didn't mind. In fact, I found it strangely peaceful, at least until the night I stumbled on those kids. That was when everything changed. I had been working there for just over a year when one of the gates at the plant malfunctioned. Normally, the heavy bar at the entrance locked tight when lowered, but after the breakdown, it didn't quite latch. Anyone who knew about it could lift the bar just enough for a car to squeeze through if someone else drove it in. Maybe a local teenager figured it out, or maybe the rumor slipped from an employee's careless tongue. Either way, it became clear the secret had spread. The first time I noticed something strange, I spotted a car parked behind the plant. As soon as my flashlight beam hit it, the engine roared to life, and the car sped toward the gate like a demon unleashed. I gave chase, expecting to catch them when they had to stop and lift the bar, but I wasn't fast enough. They slipped out into the night, tires shrieking, taillights fading into the dark. I convinced myself they were junkies, maybe looking to strip metal or snatch whatever could be sold for a quick peso. But a few nights later, I learned the truth. I crept close to another car thinking I'd catch thieves, but instead I found two teenagers, a boy and a girl, pressed close together, kissing like the world was about to end. I almost laughed at the sight. I didn't care what they were doing, but the kids panicked when they saw me. They jumped like frightened deer and sped off. That little town nearby was deeply conservative, a place where families prayed every Sunday and gossip moved faster than wind. Many of the fathers worked at the plant. Word about their children sneaking off to the factory for late-night romance could have ruined reputations. Usually, all it took was a flash of my light and the cars would scatter, disappearing like phantoms. But then came the night my flashlight didn't scare anyone away. I spotted a car idling quietly near the back. No headlights, no movement. I thought, well, this is it. Finally some stubborn kids who won't budge. I approached, calling out in a firm but friendly tone, telling them they couldn't stay. Normally the sound of my voice was enough to send them scrambling. This time nothing. The engine was off. No shuffling, no nervous laughter, just silence. My frustration grew as I came up to the passenger side. Through the rear window I could see shapes, two figures slouched in their seats. I called out again, louder this time. Still, no response. Irritated, I stepped closer, tapped my flashlight against the glass and shouted, "Hey, I'm talking to you." What I saw when the beam of my light finally hit their faces froze me where I stood. The two teenagers weren't ignoring me. They couldn't hear me. They were dead. The boy sat in the driver's seat, his body unnaturally stiff, held upright only because a wire was looped around his neck and tied to the headrest. His face was swollen, his tongue hanging grotesquely out, his skin discolored with that awful bluish tint death leaves behind. The girl beside him looked even worse. A deep wound marred the side of her neck, blood soaked across her blouse and smeared along the console. It had long dried, dark and sticky. Her head tilted slightly, her eyes half closed as if she had been slipping into sleep when death claimed her. But the boy's eyes, God, those eyes, were wide open, bulging in horror. The terror of his last moments burned permanently into them. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My knees went weak, my stomach churned, and the silence pressed down like a heavy blanket. Then instinct kicked in. I ran full speed back to the security office and fumbled for the phone. When I reached the police, my words tumbled out in a rush. A single officer arrived first, his old patrol car crunching across the gravel, and I led him back to the vehicle. He went pale when his flashlight confirmed what I had seen. By the time my shift ended, the entire area was cordoned off. More officers arrived. A photographer took grim pictures and investigators whispered quietly while examining the car. I stood off to the side, shaken and numb. The guard who came to relieve me noticed how pale I looked. He asked if I was okay. I lied, saying I just needed a drink and some rest. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't erase the image of those two lifeless kids from my mind. The weeks that followed were torture. Every night when I patrolled near the back, I felt drawn to that spot, as though the memory itself lingered in the shadows. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. Their faces haunted me. I lasted a few more months before finding another security job, one far away from that plant. Eventually, my wife and I left Mexico altogether. She was pregnant at the time, and I wanted a better life for us, far from the violence and indifference I saw back home. We moved to Tucson, Arizona. Life here has its own dangers, but at least the police seem to care, to truly fight against crime. That's more than I could say for where I grew up. Sometimes I think back on it, the night that drove me north, the nightmare that set me on this path. It's strange to realize that something so horrific could be the catalyst for something better. My abuelita used to say, "No hay mal que por bien no venga." There is no evil from which good does not come. I never truly understood her words until I looked back and realized she was right. That night broke me, scarred me, but it also pushed me toward the life I have now. Still, no matter how much time passes, when I close my eyes, I can see those kids in that car, forever frozen in the beam of my flashlight. My name's KD and I'm almost 30 years old. I've always been a fan of horror stories, the kind you read or hear about late at night when you're curled up under a blanket. But last year, my life turned into one of those stories, the kind that doesn't end when the video is over, the kind you can't pause or escape. It was real, and it was terrifying. I went through one of the most stressful and horrifying experiences of my life, and to be honest, I'm still recovering. When I think back on it, the only way I managed to get through those long nights without completely falling apart was by clinging to small comforts, videos, podcasts, anything that reminded me I wasn't alone. That's partly why I wanted to share my story. Maybe if I tell it, someone else will be more careful, or maybe someone going through something similar won't feel as hopeless as I did. It started in April of last year. I was lying in bed late one night scrolling mindlessly through Instagram when I got a message request. Normally I get those spam DMs every now and then, scammers with links or fake accounts trying to sell me garbage. Usually I block them without a second thought, but this time it was different. The account looked legitimate. The profile picture was of a girl around my age. She lived in the same city. Nothing screamed fake about it. And the message itself was simple. Just, "Hi." I hesitated, then decided to check out the profile. It looked real enough. Posts going back years, mutuals in the city, photos that weren't obviously stolen. She seemed to be in her 20s like me. That made me think maybe we'd crossed paths, maybe through work or a friend. I didn't want to be rude, so I replied, "Sorry, do we know each other?" 2 minutes later, I got a reply. But it wasn't text, it was a voice note, about a minute long. That threw me. Scammers never send voice notes, at least not the ones I'd seen. For some reason, I didn't even hesitate. I pressed play. And God, do I wish I hadn't. The first words were, "Hello, Katie." I can't describe the feeling that hit me. It was like my whole body dropped into the mattress. My skin prickled, my throat tightened. I wanted to hide. The voice was wrong. Flat, mechanical, robotic, like a cheap AI text-to-speech program. Maybe in another context it wouldn't have been scary, but in the dark, alone in bed, with only my 7-year-old daughter asleep in the next room, it was horrifying. Then the voice continued, "I've been watching you for quite some time. I've decided you have to die. Not just you. Your daughter has to die too." The message went on and on, graphic, cruel. The voice described how someone was going to make me watch while they killed my daughter, then kill me afterward. My stomach twisted with nausea. But the worst part wasn't the threats. The worst part was when the voice started describing my house. He knew things you couldn't find online. Details about the street, the color of my curtains, the layout of my living room. He knew my daughter's name. He knew what she looked like. He knew what elementary school she went to. The voice ended with, "Enjoy your final days because I'm going to enjoy ending them." When the recording stopped, I just sat there frozen. My phone felt like a live grenade in my hand. My brain screamed at me to call the cops, but another voice inside whispered that the police wouldn't do much. They'd take a report, maybe write something down, then leave me to wait for whatever was coming. What I needed wasn't just a report. I needed safety. I needed someone physically there. So I called Joey. Joey and I had been dating on and off for about a year. We weren't officially together anymore. We'd broken up a few months earlier, but we still talked. He was good with my daughter. My dad liked him. He was handy too, always fixing little things around the house. The only real problem was his drinking. When Joey drank, he became someone I didn't want around my child. That was why we split. But he'd been cutting back, swearing he was trying. That was why I still picked up his calls sometimes. And that night, Joey was the first person I thought of. He came over immediately, less than 20 minutes after I called. I was crying, shaking, barely able to explain what happened. He sat with me, holding me, telling me it was going to be okay. When I said I couldn't listen to that message again, he offered to do it for me. He took my phone into the other room. When he came back, he looked pale, scared, and angry. "We need to call the cops," he said. Hearing him say that gave me hope. He told me about documentaries he'd watched, about how law enforcement had whole cybercrime units now. 10 years ago, maybe they'd have told me to block the account and move on. But things were different now. He was sure they'd catch whoever was doing this. I told him he could stay the night, sleep on the couch if he wanted. But he didn't. Instead, he stayed awake all night, watching the street through the blinds, researching cyberstalking cases on his phone, reading advice aloud to me. It was the first night I felt like maybe I wasn't completely helpless. The next morning I called the police. They eventually sent a detective who specialized in cyberstalking. She told me exactly what to do. Save every message, every note, every username. Don't delete anything. Keep a record. She said those records could be the key to catching whoever it was. And sure enough, the harassment kept coming. New Instagram accounts every day, sometimes several. Each one started the same way. An innocent message request, then a voice note. I stopped listening to them. I just kept them saved for evidence. But the stalker noticed. They must have realized I wasn't listening anymore, because then they switched tactics. One night, as I was finishing my skincare routine, I noticed a missed call from an unknown number. They'd left a voicemail. I figured it might be important. Maybe the detective trying to reach me after hours. I played it. It was another robotic voice, another death threat. I only listened for a few seconds before I hung up, but it was enough to shatter me. I broke down crying. I called Joey again, begging him to come. Just like the first time, he rushed over. He held me while I sobbed. He comforted my daughter when she woke up, frightened by the noise. The next morning, he even drove her to school so I could collect myself. But the stalker wasn't finished. A few nights later, around the same time the previous messages had come, someone banged on my front door, hard, over and over, not knocking to be let in, pounding to scare me. My daughter was staying with my mom that night, thank God. I had just gotten out of the shower. When the banging started, I froze, then ran to my bedroom, slamming the door and pressing my back against it as if that could protect me. My hands shook as I called 911. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me as the pounding continued. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. The dispatcher asked if I feared for my life. I whispered yes. She told me officers were on the way, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, the banging stopped. A few moments later, I heard police sirens outside. 2 patrol cars had arrived. The dispatcher told me to stay put while they checked the perimeter. Finally, they told me to come down and open the door. The next morning, the detective advised me to stay with family for a while, so I packed up and went to my mom's with my daughter. It was comforting, in a way, like being a kid again, safe in her house. But when I went back to grab more clothes, I found something chilling. Someone had broken in. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. But pinned to my fridge was a note, printed, not handwritten, just 3 words and an emoji. I see you. That was the worst moment of all. Worse than the messages, worse than the banging. Because it meant someone had been inside my home, breathing the same air, walking the same floors, watching me without me even knowing. I leaned on my mom for support. Joey, too. He offered to let me stay at his place, but I chose my mom's. Still, I kept seeing Joey. He was my rock, the one person who made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely powerless. For weeks, I lived in limbo. Fear was my constant companion. I couldn't sleep without double-checking every lock. I couldn't look at my phone without dreading another message. Then, one day, the detective called. She wanted to meet in person. When she arrived, she said, "I have good news and bad news. The good news, they had found my stalker." I almost cried with relief, but then I noticed her face. She didn't look relieved. She looked grim. The bad news was the identity. The stalker wasn't some stranger online. It wasn't a random predator. It was Joey. My mind went blank. Then I laughed nervously, insisting she must be wrong. Joey had been my protector, my support, the one holding me together. He couldn't be the one destroying me. But the detective explained how they'd traced him. He had covered his tracks carefully, but he'd made one mistake. When he used that fake Instagram profile, the one of the girl who messaged me first, he hadn't scrubbed the metadata from the photos. That led them straight back to him. Even then, I clung to denial. But when the police confronted Joey, he confessed. And his reason? He said he did it so that I'd need him. All those nights he spent holding me, comforting me, guarding the window. He wasn't protecting me, he was tormenting me, then swooping in to play the hero. The betrayal was worse than the fear, worse than the messages. I had trusted him. I had leaned on him. I had even let him back into my life, into my bed, all while he was behind every single threat. Joey didn't go to prison, at least not right away. He had no priors. He confessed. The judge issued a restraining order. Eventually, he left town, moving across the country after everyone we knew found out what he'd done. I should feel relief that he's gone, and I do, sometimes. But mostly, I feel haunted, not by a stranger's threats, but by the knowledge that the person I thought was protecting me was the one trying to destroy me all along. Wherever Joey is now, I hope he rots there. My name is Bradley, and back in 2008, I thought I had life all figured out. I was working at a large insurance firm in Birmingham, one of those companies that dealt with huge construction outfits. The pay was fantastic, especially for what was basically a junior position. At that age, single and flush with cash, it felt like I was living the dream. Nights out, nice clothes, the occasional weekend trip to London. Money wasn't something I worried about. Then the financial crash hit. You remember the headlines. Banks collapsing, markets free-falling, people losing everything overnight. Well, I wasn't spared. Just days after things really started going south, I was laid off. One moment I had a secure future, the next I was staring at the ceiling of my flat wondering what the hell I was supposed to do. I had some savings tucked away, enough to keep me afloat for a while, but as the months dragged on and the job market stayed frozen, that nest egg got smaller and smaller. Eventually, I applied for job seekers allowance. It was humiliating, but it meant at least something came in as long as I could prove I was looking for work. Still, it wasn't nearly enough, and each week the walls seemed to close in a little tighter. Finally, when things were looking truly desperate, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I called up an old mate of mine named Darren. We'd known each other since school but drifted apart in uni. Darren was the type who worked a regular job but spent every evening getting stoned and playing GTA 4. I'd never touched weed, hated the thought of what it might do to my lungs, but desperation changes a man. When I called Darren out of the blue, he was shocked. I think he expected me to ask for a loan. Instead, I asked if he could get me weed. He laughed, then asked if I finally wanted to smoke. When I told him no, that I wanted to sell it, he nearly fell off his chair. But once I explained about my money problems and that it was just temporary until I got back on my feet, he started to understand. We talked late into the night. Darren himself wasn't a dealer, but he knew plenty about the trade. After a call to his supplier and some cautious back and forth, he gave me the dealer's number. Within a week, I was buying small amounts and selling to Darren and a few close friends. It was enough to cover bills and keep food in the cupboards. At first, I kept it small and safe, just people I knew personally. But as word spread, more friends of friends wanted in. I resisted at first, but then I did the maths. A handful of extra customers meant hundreds more a week. The temptation was too strong. Soon enough, my little side hustle was pulling in more than my savings ever had. Even while hustling, I kept up with job applications. I genuinely wanted back into the finance world, and finally a few months later, I got an offer. The pay wasn't as high as before, but it was steady work. I told myself that once the first paycheck came in, I'd cut ties with the drug game and move on. But when that paycheck arrived, I hesitated. I opened my phone, hovered over the dealer's number, and just couldn't delete it. Why give up hundreds of easy pounds every week for doing next to nothing? It felt safe, manageable. I convinced myself I could handle both worlds. That was my mistake. 3 or 4 months after settling into my new job, I was still quietly selling weed to that little circle of customers. One Wednesday night, everything changed. I'd gone to bed early and was dead asleep when a sound jolted me awake. A pounding, heavy and sharp, echoed through the house. I glanced at the alarm clock. 2:03 a.m. That number burned itself into my memory. The banging repeated, harder this time, rattling the front door downstairs. Then I heard the words I'd dreaded for months. "Police, open up." My stomach turned to ice. For so long I'd imagined that very scenario, raids, arrests, prison. But I'd prepared. I had hiding spots for the money and the bags. I was confident they could tear the place apart and never find anything. Trying to play it cool, I crept downstairs. Another thunderous knock shook the frame. "Police!" the voice boomed again. I took a deep breath, rehearsing the innocent act in my head. Slowly, I unlatched the locks and pulled the door open. That's when my world collapsed. It wasn't the police. It was half a dozen masked men, dressed in black, gripping hammers, wrenches, and crowbars. For a frozen heartbeat, I just stared at them, too stunned to react. Then instinct kicked in and I tried to slam the door. Too late. A boot wedged the gap, and the frame exploded inward as they surged through. I bolted toward the kitchen, praying to escape through the back door, but it was locked, and my hands fumbled stupidly with the key. One of them caught me, slamming me into the wall. I fought, wild and panicked, until a hammer crashed against my side. Pain exploded through me. I collapsed, gasping. They dragged me into the living room, tied my wrists behind my back with plastic cord, then bound my ankles and knees. I was dumped onto the couch like a sack of rubbish. "Take whatever you want," I screamed. "Just don't hurt me." But they weren't after TVs or laptops. The man with the wrench leaned in close, voice muffled by the balaclava. "Where's the stash?" Cold dread spread through me. My secret wasn't a secret anymore. I tried to bluff. "I don't know what you mean." That earned me a brutal beating. Heavy blows rained down on my legs, pain tearing through muscle and bone. A gloved hand clamped over my mouth, muffling my screams. "Where's the stash?" they demanded again. Still, I resisted. Some desperate part of me clung to the money, to the bags hidden upstairs. It was all I had left. But when one of them pressed a pair of pliers around my toe and whispered about cutting them off one by one, I broke. "Stop, stop," I sobbed. "I'll tell you." Through tears and ragged breaths, I revealed the hiding spots. 2 men thundered upstairs. Moments later came the sound of rummaging, then a triumphant shout, "Found it!" They returned, waving the bags of cash and weed. The leader nodded, satisfied. "We're done here." Relief washed over me, until he added, "Put him to sleep." I thought that was it. I thought I was dead. One of them stepped forward, fist cocked back. I braced for the end. The punch crashed into my jaw. My vision went white, then black. When I came to, the house was silent. My head throbbed, mouth filled with blood. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamt it all, until I tried to move and felt the cords cutting into my wrists and ankles. Panic surged. I was alone, tied up. No one knew. Work would expect me in a few hours, but they wouldn't call the police if I didn't show. They'd just assume I'd called in sick. I could be stuck like this for days, maybe weeks. The thought chilled me to the bone. Desperation gave me strength. I writhed and pulled until the cords dug into my skin, but they wouldn't give. My wrists felt raw, wet with blood. Then I remembered the phone. The landline sat on the coffee table. I hopped across the room like a madman, crashing into furniture until I managed to kick the handset onto the floor. With bound hands, I nudged it, pressed buttons blindly until I heard the blessed dial tone. But who to call? I couldn't call the police, not with drugs and money tied to my name. The only number I knew by heart was my dealer's. With trembling fingers, I dialed. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. Each failed call drained more hope. Finally, on the 4th try, he picked up, voice groggy. "Yo? It's Bradley," I gasped. "You have to come. Emergency." He hesitated, said he had his kid with him. I begged, explained everything in broken sobs. His tone shifted immediately. "I'm coming. Where's your spare key?" I told him. Then I just lay there, praying he'd keep his word. Half an hour crawled by, every tick of the clock agony. Then I heard movement outside, the scrape of someone climbing the fence. I shuffled toward the back door, heart pounding, and nearly collapsed with relief when I saw him step into the garden. He unlocked the door, cut me free, and steadied me as I nearly fell. He really did have his little girl asleep in the car, so he couldn't stay. But before leaving, he gave me a warning. "I'll never forget. You're lucky," he said. "I know a lad they burned with an iron. Another one can't walk right after they smashed his knee. These guys don't mess around. If they found you once, they'll find you again. Move. Now." His words haunted me. The very next week, I broke my lease, drained what little money I had left, and moved across the city. It ruined me financially, but there was no way in hell I'd risk staying. That night ended my brief career as a dealer. I'd always promised myself it was temporary, just a way to get by. But seeing the brutality up close, the masked faces, the pliers at my toes, the hammer blows to my legs, made me realize how naive I'd been. There are bad men out there, truly bad, but at least I know I'm not one of them. Back when I was still in college and living in the dorms, I had one of those nights that burned itself into my memory forever. It was around 3 in the morning, the kind of dead hour when everything is silent, except the hum of the building and the occasional car in the distance. I was dead asleep when I suddenly woke to the sound of voices right outside my window. At first, it wasn't loud, just a murmur, like someone trying not to wake the neighborhood. But the fact that it was literally right below my open window and the air was warm enough for me to leave it cracked meant that it drifted straight into my room, pulling me out of sleep. My first groggy thought was irritation. I had classes early the next day, and here were 2 people treating the dorm parking lot like their personal therapy session. I wanted to lean out, tell them to shut the hell up, and maybe throw something to drive the point home. But the second I actually started making out what they were saying, something in me shifted. I realized it wasn't just random chatter, it was a fight. And not just any fight. It was the kind of raw, venomous back and forth that drags your curiosity out of bed and glues you to every word. At first, I thought they were just a regular couple bickering, the kind of spat you could hear anywhere on campus. But after a few minutes, it became clear this wasn't your average lover's quarrel. Their voices kept dropping to hushed tones, only to flare up again when one lost patience. The girl was clearly furious, her voice sharp and cutting through the night air, while the boy's tone was low, desperate, almost pleading. He wasn't angry so much as begging for another chance, begging for forgiveness, begging for something she clearly wasn't willing to give. It clicked that they weren't together anymore. They were exes, and the guy was trying in the most pathetic way possible to claw his way back into her life. He kept saying he was sorry for something, repeating it like a chant, but the words only seemed to make her more disgusted. I remember the sting in her voice when she shot back at him. She called him revolting, told him he should be ashamed, that if she had known who he really was, she never would have gone near him. The kind of words that don't come out unless someone has crossed a line so severe that there's no coming back. The irony wasn't lost on me that for someone who claimed she never wanted to speak to him again, she was still out there, arguing with him at 3 a.m. Toxic didn't even begin to cover it, but the gossip-loving side of me couldn't pull away. If they were going to spill drama right outside my dorm window, I was going to listen. I slid my curtains back just slightly, careful not to be seen, and peered down. It was too dark to see their faces clearly. The streetlights only half lit the edge of the lot where they stood. The boy's back was to me, tall, restless, shoulders hunched as he pleaded. The girl was harder to make out, her arms folded tight across her chest, her posture radiating anger. I thought I recognized her voice from the dorms, maybe someone who lived in the next building over. The boy, though, I didn't know at all. His voice was unfamiliar, and he carried himself like he didn't belong there. They went in circles for what felt like forever, the boy muttering in low tones, trying to explain some secret, some shame he hadn't confessed before. The girl cutting him off with venom, repeating the same phrases over and over. "You disgust me. I hate you. If I'd ever known what you really were, I never would have dated you." Each word was a blade, and you could feel her twisting it deeper. Then it happened. He turned suddenly as if to storm off, and for a split second I thought it was over. But instead of leaving, he whipped back around and struck her. Hard. The sound of his fist connecting with her face echoed up to my window like a gunshot. The gasp she made when it hit wasn't just a cry. It was something worse, something that made my stomach lurch and my hand fly to my mouth in shock. She crumpled to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut, and he loomed over her, fists clenched like he might hit her again. That was the moment my adrenaline surged. I shot up on my tiptoes, slammed my hands against the windowsill, and yelled out as loud as I could, "Hey, leave her alone, you piece of crap!" It was like flipping a switch. He jerked his head up, realizing in an instant he wasn't alone, that someone had been watching him the whole time. Panic flickered across his body language, and without hesitation he bolted. He sprinted toward his car, flung the door open, and peeled out of the lot like a madman, tires screeching in the silence of campus night. My shout had woken up other students. Lights flicked on in the windows around me. Doors opened, irritated voices echoing down the hallways. At first, they were annoyed at being disturbed, but when I yelled down that the guy had just attacked a girl, everything changed. A group of us ran outside. What I found made my blood run cold. She wasn't just unconscious, she was convulsing on the pavement, her limbs jerking uncontrollably. A seizure. My heart sank as I realized she must have cracked her head on the concrete after the punch. For a terrifying moment, I thought I was watching someone die right in front of me. We called campus security and an ambulance, everyone crowding around, unsure how to help, but desperate to do something. The sight of her shaking on the ground, her eyes rolled back, left me shaken in a way I still can't fully explain. Thankfully, she survived. She ended up with a concussion and some bruises, but she lived. Her ex was caught not long after and arrested, rightfully so. But the sound, that awful, sickening sound she made when his fist connected, never left me. Years later, I can still hear it in my head, a reminder of how fragile a moment can be and how easily violence can scar not just its victims, but everyone who witnesses it.